At some point you notice the pattern. A message sits unread. A call goes to voicemail. You see the notification, feel the tiny pull to respond, and then you set the phone down, as if it were heavier than it should be. You are not angry. You are not trying to punish anyone. You do not block. You do not announce a breakup with the world. You simply stop showing up, because explaining yourself has started to feel like bleeding in public. So you choose silence, not to hurt them, but to breathe. From the outside, it looks like coldness. But for many people, this quiet retreat is the opposite of indifference. It is the last stage of being warm for too long, of carrying conversations, emotions, and emergencies that were never meant to be carried alone. When your nervous system has learned that closeness comes with disappointment, distance begins to feel like oxygen. In this video, we are going to unpack how withdrawal can form slowly, how it becomes a self-protection reflex, and why disappearing is sometimes less about rejecting others and more about rescuing yourself. What if this kind of isolation is not a personality flaw, but an adaptation? What if you are not becoming antisocial, but becoming trauma-informed in the only way your body knows how? There is a pattern here, and naming it matters. The person who used to give first, listen longest, and show up fastest, slowly becomes the person who is hardest to reach. Not because they suddenly hate people, but because they finally notice the emotional math has never been equal. It helps to separate two very different motives that can look identical from the outside. Some people withdraw out of superiority, avoidance, or contempt. That is not what we are talking about. We are talking about withdrawal that comes from repeated experiences of reaching out and being met with emptiness, of trusting and being left holding the consequences alone. In psychology, when a painful outcome repeats, the brain stops treating it like bad luck and starts treating it like a rule. Over time, this is how disappointment becomes a worldview. The distance does not begin as a statement. It begins as a conclusion. Connection is unsafe. Need is embarrassing. Vulnerability is expensive. And once that belief settles into the nervous system, the slow fade stops looking like cruelty and starts looking like self-preservation, built year by year, not in a single dramatic moment. Before the silence, there was usually a very specific kind of person, the one who carried the emotional weather of the room without being asked. The one friends described as grounding, easy to talk to, always there. In group chats, they were the first to reply, and the last to leave a conversation unresolved. In private, they remembered the small details people forgot about themselves: the interview date, the anniversary of a loss, the doctor's appointment someone was nervous about. They checked in without keeping score, not because they were naive, but because caring felt like a duty they had quietly assigned to themselves. You can see it in the behaviors. They answer quickly because they know what it feels like to wait. They offer solutions because they cannot tolerate helplessness in someone else. They make space because they learned early that other people's emotions are safer to hold than their own. Many of them become the unofficial therapist of their circle, not with credentials, but with consistency. They show up when someone is spiraling, when a relationship ends, when a family situation explodes, when confidence collapses. They become reliable in a way that almost invites dependence. And underneath that reliability, there is often a belief that love must be earned through usefulness. Some of them grew up praised for being mature, for not causing trouble, for handling things on their own. Some learned that being low maintenance kept the peace. Over time, they stop asking for much, not because they do not need it, but because need starts to feel like a risk. They fear becoming a burden more than they fear being alone, so they train themselves to be the person who never requires rescue. This is why the shift is so painful when it finally happens. They thought they were building connection, but they were also performing a role. And when they begin to notice that certain relationships only function when they are giving, they confront a brutal truth. Generosity is not the same as reciprocity. They did not become too much. They simply gave too much to places that never learned how to give back. And then, eventually, life turns the spotlight back on them. Not in a dramatic movie moment, but in the slow accumulation of strain. A breakup that empties the house, a panic week at work, a family situation that reopens old wounds, a season where sleep stops restoring anything. Sometimes it is even quieter than that. It is the moment they realize they have been strong for so long that they no longer remember how to be held. So they do something unfamiliar. They reach out. They admit they are not okay. They ask for a call, a check-in, a little presence, just enough to feel human again. This is where the disappointment stops being theoretical and becomes personal data. The first kind is silence. The message gets seen but never answered. The call goes unreturned. Days pass, and the absence speaks louder than any insult. The second kind is dismissal dressed as positivity. You will be fine. Do not overthink it. Other people have it worse. It is not cruelty, but it is a refusal to enter your inner world, and the nervous system registers it as abandonment. The third kind is the most deceptive because it imitates care, promises, without follow-through. I will check on you tomorrow. Let's talk this weekend. I have been busy, but I am here. The words land like relief, and then nothing arrives. When this repeats, hope itself starts to feel humiliating. What makes this so damaging is that these are the relationships where they used to be the reliable one. They remember the nights they stayed up to talk someone off a ledge. They remember rearranging their schedule to be present. They remember showing up when it was inconvenient. Now, when they finally need something similar, they encounter a wall of indifference, distraction, or polite distance, and that is when a devastating realization forms. They have been lonely for a long time, even while surrounded by people. The crowd was noise. The connection was one way. In psychological terms, repeated invalidation teaches the brain to stop expecting support. It recalibrates attachment towards self-containment. If asking leads to emptiness, the safest move is to stop asking. This is not bitterness yet, it is learning. And once the mind labels closeness as unreliable, withdrawal stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like the only reasonable conclusion. Once the mind reaches that conclusion, the nervous system does the rest. This is where people misunderstand what is happening, because it does not feel like a conscious decision to cut everyone off. It feels like a shift in what your body can tolerate. The brain is built to prioritize safety over happiness, and it learns fastest through repetition. When a painful outcome happens once, you might call it bad luck. When it happens again and again, the brain stops treating it like an accident and starts treating it like a pattern. In conditioning terms, connection becomes linked with threat. Your system begins scanning for the moment the warmth will turn into absence, the moment your honesty will be met with silence, the moment you will regret needing anyone. That is how core beliefs get written, not as thoughts you choose, but as rules you obey. Attachment starts to mean eventual abandonment. Trust starts to mean exposure to harm. Vulnerability starts to mean risk with no guaranteed return. And once those rules exist, they show up in the body. You feel a tightness before you text back. Your chest gets heavy when someone says, "We should talk soon," because you have heard that line before. Waiting for a reply becomes a stressor, not a normal pause, because your nervous system has learned that pauses turn into disappearances. Even positive attention can feel unstable, like a loan that will later be collected with interest. So you pull back, not to be dramatic, but to regulate. This is the moment many people begin leaving preemptively. They would rather be the one who walks away than the one left behind. Cutting contact becomes a way to control the timing and shape of pain. And control is what the traumatized brain reaches for when it cannot trust predictability. From the outside, it can look like pride. From the inside, it feels like triage. If closeness has repeatedly cost you your dignity, your energy, and your hope, distance starts to feel like the only boundary that actually holds. The paradox is that what looks like rejection is often self-rescue. They are not trying to win. They are trying to stop bleeding in places that never learned how to hold them. So the exit rarely looks like a slammed door. It looks like a slow reduction in presence, almost gentle, almost invisible. First they start replying later, not to play games, but because urgency has begun to feel unsafe. Then they stop initiating. They realize that if they do not reach first, weeks can pass without anyone noticing. That discovery changes a person. After that, the explanations get shorter. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that explaining does not create understanding. It only creates another moment where they feel exposed and unheard. Eventually, the effort itself becomes the trigger. The thought of sending a text brings a wave of fatigue. The idea of catching up feels like performing stability for people who only show interest in the performance. So they choose the quietest kind of boundary, less access. They stop being available for emotional emergencies. They stop rescuing conversations. They stop translating their pain into words that other people can comfortably digest. And then one day, without a scene, they are gone. From the outside, this silence can look like punishment, but for many people, it is not a weapon. It is a tourniquet. It is the moment they decide to stop re-entering the same dynamic and hoping it will suddenly become mutual. Each time they tried again, they paid with their nervous system. Each time they hoped, they reopened the wound. So withdrawal becomes a form of regulation, a way to lower the constant arousal of waiting, guessing, and overgiving. It is not an attack on others. It is a refusal to keep abandoning themselves in order to keep a relationship alive. To the outside world, this is the part that looks like a personality change. People say, "You're different now." They call you cold, closed off, hard to read, even afraid of intimacy. And in a shallow sense, they are describing what they can observe. Fewer replies, fewer appearances, less emotional availability. But they mistake a boundary for a transformation. What they are really witnessing is not the birth of indifference, but the death of tolerance for one-sided connection. Because this person did not wake up and decide to become unreachable. They arrived here after trying, repeatedly, to stay open in places that only felt open when they were the one giving. They offered attention, patience, and presence like it was their responsibility. And when the relationship demanded that someone else step into that role, the room went quiet. Over time, the nervous system stops labeling that quiet as a rare disappointment and starts labeling it as the norm. So the person does not close their heart. They stop leaving it propped open for people who never learned how to walk through gently. There is a crucial difference between withdrawing because you do not need anyone, and withdrawing because you cannot keep paying the emotional cost of being the only one who shows up. This is not a lack of love. It is a refusal to keep bleeding to prove you care. And this is where the word lonely gets misunderstood. Physical solitude is not always the source of loneliness. Sometimes, it is simply the first honest environment you have had in years. The deepest loneliness often happens in company, when you are surrounded by people yet still feel unseen, untranslated, and emotionally unattended. It is the kind of loneliness that makes you question your own needs, because every time you express them, they seem to disappear into the room. So, when someone finally withdraws, the immediate experience is not always misery. It can be quiet. It can even feel like relief, because there is no longer the daily strain of waiting to matter. No longer the subtle humiliation of hoping someone will notice your silence the way you used to notice theirs. Being alone becomes less painful than being half held, half ignored. This is the paradox. Isolation can feel like oxygen, when connection has become a place where you slowly suffocate. And once you taste that stillness, you realize the loneliness was not caused by the absence of people. It was caused by the absence of reciprocity, long before you ever left. After the cutoff, many people expect to feel devastated, as if solitude will punish them for leaving. But what often arrives first is something quieter. Nervous system relief. Your body stops bracing for unanswered messages. Your mind stops rehearsing explanations that will never be received. The noise drops, and in that silence, self-respect can finally be heard. It becomes clear that choosing peace was not selfish. It was corrective. You were not starving for attention. You were starving for mutuality. Still, there is a subtle risk here. When isolation works, it can start to feel like the only strategy that works. The fortress keeps you safe, but it also keeps you untouched. And over time, safety can harden into a reflex that blocks even the relationships that might have been different. The goal is not to return to the old version of you, the one who overgave and hoped it would become love. The goal is to reconnect without betraying yourself. That is why healing here is not about opening the door all at once. It is about opening it 5%. Share something small with someone who has shown consistency. Then watch what they do, not what they promise. In trauma-informed terms, behavior is the data. Who follows through when you are quiet, not just when you are entertaining? Who can sit with discomfort without minimizing you? That is how you identify emotional safety. Next, replace disappearing with boundaries when possible, because boundaries preserve dignity without requiring distance as the only option. A single clear sentence can do what paragraphs never did. I can't keep doing one-sided support. I need real presence, not just words. You do not have to justify it. You do not have to sound perfect. You are simply naming a standard. Then choose quality over quantity. One dependable person is more regulating than 10 people who only show up when it is easy. And pay attention to a tricky distinction. Safe is not always familiar. If you are used to earning closeness through overfunctioning, reciprocal care can feel suspicious at first, like you are waiting for the catch. That is your nervous system confusing unpredictability with normal. So yes, the peace you found is real. Let it be the foundation, not the prison. You do not need to abandon your need for connection. You need to stop abandoning yourself to get it. So if you have been slowly cutting people off, do not confuse that with a lack of love. In many cases, it is the clearest expression of self-respect your system could produce after years of being the one who carried everything. You did not leave because you hated anyone. You left because you finally understood the cost of staying in one-sided relationships where your presence was expected but your pain was inconvenient. You chose peace over chaos, not as an escape from life, but as a refusal to keep breaking yourself into pieces just to remain acceptable. And that is the point worth holding on to. Withdrawal is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it is a nervous system making a mature decision after collecting enough evidence. Sometimes it is a boundary that finally worked. The world may call it coldness, but internally it can be relief, clarity, and the quiet return of dignity. For now, I want to ask you, when did you realize you were lonely, even in a crowd? And if you have disappeared from people's lives, was it because you were bitter, or because you were exhausted from always being the one who showed up?